Welcome to this brief demonstration of Data Migrator using the Data Management Console to build a data flow to copy data from multiple sources. The Data Management Console shows us a list of servers. Objects on the servers are organized in application directories. Here we see a list of data and process flows stored on the server. Now we're looking at those that are distributed with the server itself. You can configure an adapter to access any data source that you may have. With Data Migrator, you can access over 100 different data sources. And while the process of configuring a data source varies slightly based on the database that you select, the general functionality is the same. Here we're configuring an adapter to connect to a Microsoft SQL Server Express server. We specify the connection information, the name of the default database, and we choose to configure the adapter. Data Migrator comes with the built-in flows we just saw that demonstrate some common and some complex things you can do with this ETL tool. Rather than providing data for these flows, we allow you to create sample data in an adapter that you configure. So here we'll create sample data for Microsoft SQL Server. Before you can begin building flows, you need to create the metadata or synonyms that the flows will use. The process for creating these synonyms is similar no matter what adapter you're using. Typically, you create metadata for database tables. We also support creation of metadata for views and database stored procedures. The underlying tables have cryptic names. The metadata creation process allows you to easily rename them to something more meaningful. Here we've successfully created the synonyms. The new metadata is reflected here in the tree. Checking to make sure that you can retrieve the data from the data source is an important first step before proceeding to build the ETL flows. So we'll look at each of the two data sources. It's often necessary to retrieve information from more than one table. Joining these tables together in the metadata layer simplifies retrieval later on. So here I add the second table to the first table, specify a join on the order number from one table to the other, and save the synonym with the combined information. Now if I do a sample data, I will see information from both tables joined together. The synonym editor tool allows us to easily change cryptic, non-user-friendly names into more meaningful names. So here, for example, I changed the field name snum to store code to give a better indication as to what the field means and to save the synonym. There are more changes that we could make. Here we're going to look at a final version of that synonym with some additional changes. Note the additional virtual columns, updated column names, and the lookup column that's been added. Data profiling provides us a way to get a summary of the data in a table. You can do it for the entire table or for a column. Here we'll do data profiling for the year column. We see it contains values 2004, 5, and 6, mostly for the last 2 years. We'll use this information later when we create a data flow. Now we're going to create a data flow for moving data from the operational system into a table for reporting. So we create a new flow. There's a data flow mode and a process flow mode. We'll look at process flow later on. First, we're going to look at the data flow. Before we do that, we're going to set an option for the number of rows that we retrieve for test reports. The default is 50. We're going to set it to 200. Then we're going to open the sample directory so we can see our sample tables that we're going to use as the sources for this data. The first step in creating a data flow is specifying the sources where the data is coming from. You may want to open up the table to look at the columns, or do a sample data to look at the data to confirm that this is the table that we want to use as a source. Here we see the column values, and we've confirmed that this is the correct table to use. Once we've done that, we can simply drag the name of the source table from the list of table names onto the data flow. An alternate way of adding a table is right-clicking on the workflow, selecting Add Source, selecting an application directory, and here we'll select the orders table we saw a short while ago, and add it to the workflow. Note the join. At this point, we can add source transformations or virtual columns to be used in this flow. This is the second place we've seen where we can do this. The first was in the synonym layer itself. We're going to call this field year month, and we're going to create a field that contains the year and the month so that we can group on this later on. We're going to say it has 8 digits, and it's going to be calculated as the year times 100 plus the month. We can test the transformation to make sure we're getting the values that we want. Next, we'll specify how the tables are joined together. We could do a left outer join, a right outer join, a full outer join, a cross join, but for this flow, we'll do an inner join. We also have a calculator, so if we wanted to do something other than an equijoin, we could do that. Now we're going to select the columns that we wish to extract for loading into the target table. We'll select the product number, the store code, and the year-month column that we calculated a few moments ago. Since these 3 columns comprise the key of the target table, we'll do a group by so we get 1 row for each unique combination of those 3 columns. Then we'll select the quantity, the line price, and we'll derive a new column, line cost of goods or line COGS, as the product of the cost from the inventory table and the quantity from the orders table. We want to aggregate these 3 columns, so we'll select them and do a sum on their values. We can look at the SQL that's generated, and we can do a sample data to confirm these are the calculations that we want. We can add a filter to restrict the retrieval to relevant data. In this case, we only want those rows with the year 2005 or later, so we add a SQL calculation to do that. This one's simple. We also have available to us any SQL function, so we can do more complex calculations as well. Now that we've identified where the data is coming from, we're going to identify where it's going to. We select a reporting table as the target. For load properties, for the load type, we'll use the default of insert update. There's also bulk load options. For prior to load, we're going to truncate the table before any loading is done. Now we can map from source to target. An auto map button maps identically named columns from source to target, or we can manually map as we do here for year month, or we can do a calculation. Here we'll calculate profit as the price minus the cost of goods using the column that we calculated earlier. This is the 4th place where we can do calculations. Here we check to make sure the calculations were done correctly. We can also do a validate before we do the load. Here I only want to load those rows where the total number of objects sold were greater than or equal to 10. So I'm putting in a test to only load those values. I can test that as well, and here I see a 1 for those rows that would get loaded, or 0s for those that will get rejected. Finally, I can add additional targets. Here I'm adding a second table. It's going to use the output of the select statement, so there's no transformations being done here. I just select the number of key columns. I'll give it a new name, and I'll call it line RPTS or line reports. All right, so now that we've completed building the flow, let's save it and run it. We'll give it a name data flow and save it in the base app directory. And then we'll submit it to run on the server. It'll take just a moment. When it completes, we'll see a line at the bottom of the screen that indicates the flow has completed. Now we can view the log, and we see the number of rows processed by the job, the number of rows rejected due to validation errors, and so on. Now we're going to see how we can enhance the report from our data flow with a stored procedure. So we create a stored procedure with a select statement that sums the numeric columns. We're going to save it in the same directory, and we'll run it to see the output, the sum of all those fields. Now we're going to create a process flow that calls our data flow and stored procedure. We'll change our filter to show the procedures. We'll drag the data flow into the process flow, connect the start to the data flow. We'll drag our report into the process flow and connect the data flow to the report. Then we want to send an email message if the flow fails, so we drag in an email object. The condition shows that it runs if the flow fails, while the report runs if the flow completes successfully. I'm going to save the flow. I'm going to give it the name of process flow. And then we'll submit it to run on the server. We see that it's complete. We can view the log, same as before. And if we scroll down, we can see the output from our report. In addition to running a flow immediately, we can also schedule a flow to run. Here we see on the schedule, we can run a flow once, on a recurring interval, on specific days and times that we specify. One additional feature of Data Migrator is the ability to run impact analysis reports. If we were to make a change to one of our source synonyms, we would like to know what data flows would be affected by that. We can run an impact analysis report for a selected table. And here we see all of the flows that use that table, including the data flow that we just created. We can also do the analysis for an individual column if a change was made to a column. Here we select the quantity column and run impact analysis for that, and we see every data flow that uses that column and how it's used.